We sit down, let's start before everyone disappears. Okay, please, can we settle down? Comrade Stephen and Comrade Carol, Amand, can we, before I start the song. Okay, this is our last session, so to make sure that we end on a high note, we brought our donors, and so everyone can open your purse, and there will be something coming into your pocket. Okay, so thank you. It's an important thing because, as I always say, as government, we can't do everything. We always rely on donors to come up with and fund interesting programs and experiment on our behalf so that when things become large scale are actually things that are tested so that we don't waste resources. So we have our panelists here. We've got Gail Campbell, who's the CEO of Xenex Foundation, and as we know that the Xenex Foundation is a non-profit independent donor organization that focuses on mathematics, science, and language education. And we know the kind of work that they've been doing in the country and the pioneering work that they've been doing in terms of helping the country to think around issues of how we improve our mathematics and our learning that is happening. We also have Dr. Andile Dube, who has worked with UNICEF South Africa since 2020 as an education manager, quality and system strengthening and leading work ranging from curriculum, care, support, and youth. And we know also the kind of work that UNICEF has been doing in the country in terms of supporting the country and ensuring that we actually deliver to many of our people who actually need a good quality education. We also have Dr. Wilson Young, who's, as he's described here, as a native of Washington. Not a native of America, but just Washington. And has been in Foreign Service Officer with USAID since 2008. She's a devoted mother to her son and a people development business with her husband. And before working for USAID, she was as a senior gender advisor of USAID in Afghanistan Gender Unit and co-chair of U.S. Embassy Afghanistan Gender Council. And the work that USAID has been doing in the country, starting also with me being becoming an education economist, it's the interesting work that they have been investing for a long time in the country to try and improve what we as a country in terms of education and ensuring that we have systems that are sustainable but are also costed. So this is our panel, and then I'm going to give them a chance, going to be able to sit probably with them down there, to just give them a chance to share and reflect with us from the 2 days that we've had. As donors, what do they think in terms of the things that we need to keep in mind, lessons learned that we need to be thinking around? So I'll start with USAID to say from your side, what are these lessons, what are these big take-home that we need to have as we go forward?
Thank you, I appreciate that. Hello everyone and good afternoon, or yes we are in the afternoon. I think in the last 2 days, I honestly want to say that I am truly invigorated by the conversations and the discussions that have taken place. I think being here in the last year, I arrived in South Africa March of 2021. Previously, I had worked in South Africa, not with USAID, but as a Fulbright scholar here, and I did my doctoral dissertation actually on UNICEF's gender-based violence, girls' education movement. So in the last 2 days, what I have heard and what I have seen gives me hope, helps me to be able to go back to my colleagues within USAID to talk about strategic planning, to talk about the opportunities that currently exist. And what do I mean by that, right? So when I think about how can we leverage and influence the discussions that have taken place today, how can we continue to do that with government, as partnership with the DBE, and then how can we also, as funders, talk about opportunities to close some of the gaps by leveraging our own relationships. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Recently, I was visiting the Western Cape, and I had an opportunity to go and visit some ECD centers, to have a conversation with the Deputy Chief Whip about what's happening in education at large. And one of the things that came up to me that is connected very much to the work that we've done for the last 10 years with the early grade reading assessment is also recognizing the necessity to continue to be innovative in what we're doing. To be innovative, but at the same time to be more strategic. And what do I mean by that? So in the last 2 days, I heard the concerns about parenting and about the education of parents, about the opportunities to engage with parents. As we know, community and engaging on a community level is pivotal to the success of our children, and I say our children, becoming learners, becoming educated, and not systemically educated within a box, but educated in the sense of knowing themselves, able to read, able to function. So that's something I heard constantly repeated here for the last 2 days. And the importance of doing so as a collaborative amongst each other, right? And not doing it within a box, but saying, how can we look at the resources we have, as Stephen has said, as Mpumi has said, everyone has said, since we've been here looking at that 2.2 billion, I believe, how can we leverage what we're doing? Sometimes the answer is more money, sometimes the answer is not more money. But with what we have, what are we doing with it? So that's one pivotal piece of what I've heard. The other thing I've heard is the application of various models. The models that others have spoken to that have worked in places, and also the models that have failed in places. And how can we continue to do deeper research to look at the models that worked and look at the models that failed and look at the lessons that we can have from those various models. That's also stood out to me for the last 2 days. And the next thing I'll say, and then I'll sort of give opportunity for my colleagues to talk about, I do believe that it's pivotal as a funder, a partner, I like to think as a funding partner, to remember that we don't have all the answers and that we have limited time, particularly in regards to the US government, limited time and limited funds. And so we have to be critical thinkers in response to how we're going to continue this work, how we're going to fund this work, how we're going to collaborate with this work, and how we're going to do, how we're going to have movement towards appropriate responses. That's the other thing that's really stood out for me. And in humility, be able to continue to listen to the government, to continue to listen to what's happening on the ground, the universities, our grassroots partners, and say, what is the need? Because we don't have all the answers. And that's the other thing that I want to say about the last 2 days. You can talk specifics in regards to percentages and performance and all of that, but at the end of the day, it has to be a collaborative effort, and that's the biggest thing that's stood out for me. Co-creation and collaborative integration in executing this work.
Thank you.
Sure.
Gail?
Thanks, Thabo, and good afternoon, everyone. I thought, you know, over the 2 days, I was reflecting on the partnership, first of all, before getting to the content. And then I'll make a remark on the content and where we are in thinking about next steps. So just on the partnership, and in various ways, it's been not only funders, it's been the departments, it's been partners that have worked on implementation, it's been researchers and evaluators. And I think the important lesson coming out of this is we all bring our different kinds of expertise. And importantly, I even said, coming here, I thought, okay, I've heard a number of the presentations, but each time I've learned through the engagement in the work that's been done over the last 10 years. So I think the collaboration, we must think of it as being more than just a funding partnership, but it's been a learning partnership as well. I think over the 2 days, what resonated for me was the congruence between what we're doing in South Africa and the international research, okay? And that there's alignment in what we're finding here and what's working in other similar contexts. And of course, then the big question is, so what next, okay? Funders can help catalyze initiatives, but then we're also looking at how does this influence the system. And I began to wonder if there's a role in addition to being funding partners, but whether we can support some of the advocacy for take-up. And whether we could add our voice to that as well, in terms of how the work gets taken up. And then also to echo with what Felicia was saying, I think a number of new areas have come up. Working with parents, how to work with learners outside of school, and that's a big area that we're interested in terms of learning backlogs. So let me leave it there and hand over to my colleague.
It's quite interesting. They've covered everything, and then I'll have to find something. You know, I think just as you say, donors, it raises one issue. First, on the partnerships, as a group of funders or donors, we've always seen ourselves as those who should be providing platforms for engagement. Those who should be providing or engaging around how partnering by different or sectors should look like. And so mostly, particularly as UNICEF, and I know that the two colleagues here also, we don't see ourselves as those who hold the money, but we see ourselves as those who can, as Gay puts it, be catalysts, but draw in different players who would otherwise have the money, but possibly do not have some of the alignment that we need in the country. Secondly, as UNICEF, we're constantly talking about what become the priority. So we've got a role, or we've got a responsibility to support government. And in supporting government, whatever we do should be aligned to government priorities. It should be aligned to both the national and international instruments. It should be aligned to evidence that is generated both globally and nationally. So for us, evidence is quite an important one. And I think, I mean, just when I think Carol started, and Stephen, they spoke about 2012 and that 10-year cycle of generating evidence, of being patient, of the misses and lessons learned is quite critical. And as funders or donors or would-be mobilizers, we ought to understand how long programs like this will take, and that in the process you learn, you make better, you learn from other contexts, you learn from other programs. And so when you are going to be supporting interventions like this, you are not hoping to do or change in a year or two. You have to have patience. You have to rely on evidence. And it was quite critical that we constantly remember how long the journey has been, and that how long the journey ahead is going to be. The last thing I want to mention is this struggle. I mean, yesterday we did say it's business unusual. I mean, 500,000 million children globally cannot read for meaning by the age of 10. South Africa evidence showing that we had really started to turn the corner and then COVID hit, and so that becomes a really difficult context to be. So how do we deal with grounding the models that generate evidence whilst we are thinking about scale and thinking about the needs now, for me, has been one of the most difficult ones. We know, for an example, if we want to scale up early grade reading program very soon, it might mean that for some of the areas where it's still under testing, we might find challenges there. But how do we do that, and also think about scale? And lastly, just on the business unusual, we also know that, I mean, GAP and other studies that have been presented this year have shown the role of structured learning programs in change. We've made some of the examples around how the early grade reading program can really contribute to change, and how do we do that at scale, and how do we do that with the resources that are available or not available, and how do we ensure that it's not only in selected areas but goes nationally? I'll stop there for now.
Thanks. So, I mean, from your talk is basically, okay, there's a hello somewhere. Okay, there's, so it's clear that there is an issue of windows, that there's always a time limit in terms of funding, and yet we see from this program that actually we need a long-term funding. So as funders, how do you balance the two? Because you also have other mandates that you have to deal with, and yet we know that if your funding was only for 1 year, this program would not have actually yielded the kind of results that we are looking at today. How do you then balance the fact that you have a mandate of short time, and also, but the demand for seeing impact is much longer? I know anyone who...
I could start. I think what's always helpful is to, during the time of design and initiation, to really understand the intervention, and you understand the evidence, and you understand change in education. And if we miss the length of the possible length of intervention and change, then that is the biggest miss. Because then you go out there and you are looking for funding for 1 year for intervention that evidently would take longer if you have to look at evidence a little bit longer. And so co-creation has been one of the greatest foundation of the work. We're lucky in South Africa. I'm not saying this because Stephen, Carol, and Bumi are here. We're lucky in South Africa because we've got a very strong research team in government. And so those engagement and the use of evidence and what it takes for us as partners at development stage, it always helps. And so when you then do the whole planning for the program, you already understand that it might take a little bit longer. But you also need to work a little bit closer and constant check-ins. For an example, we might know that you plan for an intervention to take 3 to 5 years, but in between things happen. COVID happens. Happens when you say the intervention is 5 years. So how you engage around some of those dynamics and the challenges and the contextual issues that affect the intervention becomes a different issue. But of course you have partners who would then say, actually, the amount of money that I have is going to be for a year. So you look at within the intervention, what is it that can be done in a year within the intervention and move for that. And so the engagement, the constant, the planning together, the co-creation, the close monitoring of the intervention and implementation, the ensuring that there is evidence will always help in bridging that gap between short-term and long-term, and also just making sure that the people behind the funding already also understand how it works to implement in education and how education change happens.
Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, if I can add on that, I was reflecting on the time bound of a particular project. Say EGRS 1 had a time frame, and then a long-term strategic view about thinking about how can we impact on learning outcomes in literacy and then in mathematics also, because thinking about the basics in the early grades. So yes, we do work in defined terms in having a contract for a specific project, but I think what's been helpful is also having the long-term view and having the constant view about how do we impact on the system. I think what Andile is saying is correct. The fact that we've been in the partnership together, in co-creation, in looking at the results, in looking at identifying where we're having problems, in being part of the dissemination, has helped in terms of going back to our respective principles and talking about funding for the next phase of the work. I mean, I remember being interviewed by 3IE, and they were asking us about the first phase. And I think sometimes we don't think about how this work has affected other big initiatives in the country. And I was reflecting on that with them as well. So for us, it's been more than just the EGRS work and the continuation of it, but also seeing how it has impacted on other work that's been done with other partners and at systemic level.
I think when I hear you mention impact, the first thing that comes to mind for me is the idea about like growth financing and thinking about that, looking at small and medium enterprises as a way to continue to build and do this work, to do this research work, or to fund actual activities on the ground. And the reason I've been thinking about that, because we need non-traditional tools that will actually have a more sustainable ability to be present. For example, one thing I was looking at, that we've been looking at since I've been here, okay, we have Power Africa, we have energy, we have environment, we have all of these other sectors who, honestly, they do get the big bucks, right? I mean, they get the multiple millions and billions of rands. And yet, for education, how can we leverage that investment with those other sort of internal partners? So the Department of Education may or may not have access to that, but as funders, and at least from the US government side, we do. So we are trying to network and build capacity within ourselves where we can start to reach out to some of those small and medium enterprises so that we can have sort of the sustainability that currently exists. For instance, Power Africa. We went to them, we said, okay, we have this happening within education, working with entrepreneurship, working with learning and teacher training. How is it that everyone is going to benefit if we can improve the efficacy of those teachers, if we can improve and give them access to more tools, more materials? That's the other thing that I've heard continuously mentioned here. And so with Power Africa, they got that. Even though it's not an energy focused event, it is a training of saying these teachers are producing the young people, the children that are going to be your engineers, that are going to need to be able to have access to reading, to have access to basic skills. So how can we work with you in ensuring that that becomes a more sustainable process? And so that's what we're trying to do, even internally amongst our own colleagues.
Okay, then is there any advice that any of you can take this one? Any advice that you have for other donors who are working around early grade, early grade literacy? Are there any advices that you can give? Because I assume that there are going to be also others who are going to be coming or wanting to play a role in this space. And what would you say, be careful about, and this is where you need to be focusing on? Thank you.
All right, I'm going to jump on this because, like I said, I've been here for a little over a year. It's not a very long time, but I consider coming to South Africa, like I said, coming back home for the other 2.5 years that I spent my time here. The first thing I would tell other donors is please don't reinvent the wheel. When something already exists, don't come to the table as though you know the answer, you can solve the problem. Because it has to be co-created, it has to be collaborative. There should be higher education institutions at the table. There should be the government of South Africa at the table. There needs to be greater flexibility in the designing of our projects and even greater flexibility in being adaptable, and to be careful that we're not representing ourselves or representing, even me, representing the US government to say that we have the answer and this is what South Africa should be doing. That is definitely my recommendation. I've seen that a lot. And I think it varies if there are government donors who are representing various governments, and if you are a private sector donor, there may be a different level of influence. But that's one thing that I would say. Be flexible, listen, and listen. Make sure you have the right people at the table. Because the other thing that I found is in early grade reading, I asked when I arrived, who are the stakeholders? Who are we working with? We are fortunate to have the monitoring, evaluation, and learning team that we have here, right? Because they really get it. They really understand. They're really committed. But at the same time, as donors, I was asking internally, you know, where are we with our capacity? Where are we with our understanding? Have we listened? And just sit at their feet to say, this is what's needed for South Africa. And so that would be my recommendation, to make sure that there's not a duplication of work. Often I was going through sort of looking at what's happening. We're working on the presidential youth initiative, and like you said, they have all this money, and they're organizing, and they've created this system where they're putting in all of the partners and donors' information for every program and project. And when I was looking at that, I thought, wow, some of this is duplication. What if we could take those multiple millions and put it someplace else? If I know that UNICEF is working on a particular aspect in early childhood and early grade reading, can we partner? Can we continue to work together? Because there are ways to do that. But to make sure also with the government, we're not reinventing the wheel, that when we're talking to our government partners as well, that we have the right people at the table who can make decisions. Those would be some of my recommendations. I pass on. Thank you.
Any other taker?
Yeah, I mean, I can't echo enough the point about being evidence-led in the decisions that you make as a donor, and as you're saying, scanning the environment to see what is being done. I mean, thinking about USAID and UNICEF, I think they sit in unique positions in relation to governments. And if I think about corporate donors and private philanthropy, they're often sitting a little bit removed. And there is possibly somewhat a tendency of wanting to be identified with a project and to do projects. And I think we've got to be part of helping influence donors to get involved in bigger initiatives so that the funding can be leveraged rather than having so many smaller projects, unless they're very clear about the intent that they want to pilot or innovate to add to the body of evidence. The other thing I'd say is that when you're piloting, when you're innovating, don't be afraid of what we're calling failure. Okay. I know it's difficult for all of us to report that we did something and that it didn't work. But actually, if you think about it, we've learned so much from what hasn't worked, to take the work forward. And that's what I would talk to about donors, that when they want to work in any sphere, it's about taking risk, and some things will work and some things won't.
Yeah, and I think I've worked for both private donors, corporate donors, and I would say that we must remember that we shall not be cutting a ribbon anytime soon. And so if you are coming into the space, just remember that it really is not about the idea of excitement about short-termism and being known for short-term implementation. So when you come into the space, you should be prepared for that. I think, Gail, you've covered issues around evidence, and I just wanted to add that we need to build on what exists and not be afraid to take the next step or follow some of the lead. So maybe example from the early grade reading studies is you start with looking at the coaching, and then you train people on coaching. Before you know it, there is a short learning program that is likely to benefit at scale. And so because you've trusted the evidence and followed the experts in the field and followed the leads, it then gives you even more products. And so we have to be open to those ideas. What we also have learned is when government leads or when government take leadership in interventions, the likelihood of embedding becomes higher and the likelihood of sustainability becomes higher. And so we have to constantly seek opportunities to let government or to allow government to lead. We also are not technical experts in some of those areas. So I'm not a technical expert in phonics and how reading happens, but after sitting with the group, we know enough. But we know of how systemic change happens. We know how quality and system strengthening happens. And so we have to trust them, the experts in the field, to come with the expert guidance, expert generation, how we do things, the method, the sampling, all of the technical areas. We trust those who become experts. And so when you are a funder, you are coming to support or to provide, even if it's funding in some cases for funders who just fund and want to see results at the end. But we want to be able to let the technical expert do the technical work. Otherwise, no amount of money will ensure change. The last one is alignment. We need to be aligned in all we do. We need to be aligned in ways we work. We need to align in just the principles of collaboration, how we trust one another, how we respect one another, how we give other space, how we define roles and responsibility, and just the basics of how we engage. Last, money is power. And sometimes we can, as funders, you can avoid that, but if you have that at the back of your mind, that even when you are unintentional about that, money is power, and half the time this money is not even ours. So money is power, and how we engage with others, we must remember that can distract or move focus from what we want to do, and in this case, reading and numeracy and literacy and all other quality education interventions. We need to be able to remember that all the time, so that as we engage, we engage respectfully, and we remember that the money does not come from our own farms.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's true.
Before we close this, I'm going to open for any questions from the left wing and the right wing. The right wing, you're allowed to say something. We won't arrest you. Any hands this side? Okay. From the left wing, okay, Carol, I can see you there. Any other left wing? I am centrist, so you're allowed to ask left-wing questions too. Okay, so we'll have Carol, and then we'll then have a closing statement.
It's not a question, but it's a comment.
We are used to people from the left always defying the instruction. It's okay.
Hijacking the agenda. It's not a question, it's a comment. And it's a comment from somebody who has institutional memory, AKA somebody who's the furniture in the room. And I am struck by this particular panel. I'm struck by the depth of understanding of the issues that have been discussed. I think it's something that is very rare in sectors. I come from the health sector, I've also worked in the education sector. Extremely rare to have that depth of understanding. That's the first thing. And the amount of convergence that there is around what the real agenda is in education. So I think that's extremely important to acknowledge. I think what Gail, I don't know whether it was Gail or Andile, I'm not sure, said about helping other people. Of course, you said it much more elegantly, but helping other people to understand what the issues are, the priorities are, is extremely important, especially when resources are at stake. And those resources are not financial. They're actually the capability and the ability of young children in this country to contribute to a better country in the future. And that's extremely, extremely powerful. So the fact that we have that convergence, the fact that we have that understanding within the sector then arms us to be able to do something with it. And what we do in the next 5 to 10 years is extremely important in that respect. And in my professional capacity, I do want to welcome that help. 3 of you spoke about sharpening, refining how we do things, and also alerting, advocating for some of the learning to be expanded, escalated, taken to scale, etc. And I am reminded about all the other presentations. It's extremely important. I mean, Martin's presentation about the real financial crunch is important. So I'm really grateful for the comments. I'm really grateful for the contribution, and I don't think I'm also hopeful that it won't stop here. So very long comment. Sorry, Chairperson.
That's fine. May I add something as well? So earlier today when we had the tea break, I was talking to a gentleman, I'm not sure where he is now, but in reference to communication and telling our story. And I think that that's the other thing that's important. That's another pivotal part about these last 2 days. We've had conversations with Mpumi and Stephen and Yanali and everyone else, you know, about that. But I think that events like today are great, right? But there's that element also of preaching to the choir, as we say. And so how can we continue to elevate those conversations? As funders, we can do that, right? We have that sort of engagement that takes place with various representatives. And so we can help tell the story, but you help us frame the story. So it's really us doing it together. And I think that's another pivotal piece. So that every time we are speaking about what's happening in early grade reading, what's necessary for the children of South Africa, for the actually communities, because like I said, I also am framing it from an economic standpoint. Yes, there are often times when we can say we should do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. But the reality is most people outside of this room may not think that way. And so for them, it's telling the story that motivates them from a private sector piece, from a governmental piece, from a funder's piece, to constantly keep investing, not just physically, but also in the sense of the story that's being told about how pivotal this work is. And so I just wanted to add collaboration and in the co-creation. Let's not just co-create activities, but let's also co-create language, co-create the stories, so that we are all having a better understanding and representing what needs to take place. That's the one thing that also stood out for me, is how do we tell our story? What is the story, right? And who gets access to that information? Thank you.
Thanks. So in closing then, I think I'm going to give the panel to comment on 2 things, and then we close. One is that we would like to see the EGRS going to scale. And what will be your advice on how we ensure funding? Because probably when you grow this kind of thing, there's going to be more need for funding to ensure that it actually goes to scale, and we, like the way that we would like to see it being done, rather than it being a watered down program. So for government, before government adopts it, we need to be able to demonstrate that it really works all over, not just in the provinces that have it's been done in. So what is the advice on how to ensure that funding is there? And what will you say will make it attractive for funders to be actually be still interested? Or more funders to come into this. And then the last question is, going forward, what is the next step that you think DBE should be thinking around this thing? I don't know who wants to jump into it.
That's a biggie.
Yeah. So let me start. Firstly, I think we should start with recognizing that the DPE has already started thinking about scale. So the financial review study that was, a framework that has been developed is really about thinking about how do you take this intervention in one province and what it would take to implement in all 9 provinces using both government funding, external funding, or using hybrid models. I think Mpumi spoke about that yesterday. So there is already thinking about that. So which is great because it says that we already in this partnership there is thinking about innovating, but thinking about innovating and development, but thinking about scale. So that whole idea of innovating whilst thinking about scale, it's always great. So for partners who really would like to see how this goes forward, possibly we start by looking at that model that the department has already developed. And secondly, we have to remember that the early grade reading program, as taking from the structured learning programs, has proven, SLPs have proven capacity of, making change and making rapid change. And so we think about scale along those lines. There's already evidence which Gail was talking about. We've already has lessons around what works best and what does not work best. And so as we are thinking about scaling, we have to then say, as funders and those who are interested in funding, when you look at the different components of early grade reading, which is the area that is most interesting, not just interesting, but aligned to your strategies and can be easily supported when you do funding. But also, we want to challenge ourselves to think about the fact that it's no longer just about what we had as challenges before COVID, but it's about how are we dealing with the impact of COVID in the system. So as we're coming into the intervention, you look at the financial review and see where you can come in, look at the different components of early grade reading and what you think could be best, but also maybe just taking it back and challenging the department to saying, what would it take to scale whilst the intervention, particularly in the Northwest, is going on without mudding the project in the Northwest. So that is on scale. On the next step, I think for me, it tallies on that. We need to practically think about how do we take what we have now, how do we take the evidence that has influenced, particularly global knowledge on structured learning programs, capacity on building on structured learning programs. How do we take all of those as South Africans and recognize how much work we have done and how we then scale up without, messing up what we're already doing in some areas.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, in thinking about your question, I'm thinking about holding the tension between the ongoing research agenda and thinking about scale and large-scale rollouts at the same time. And I think it's important that both should happen at a parallel level, because there is much more work to do about building evidence about what works and what doesn't work. On the element of scale, and I'm thinking about the words that Dave Evans said, what's the minimum that we need to do in terms of thinking about going to scale? And I think drawing on if we can come to some common understanding about that minimum in terms of looking at going to scale, particularly in literacy, that would be an important first step for the DBE, because I know in the costings we looked at a number of different models, but what would be the minimum for success? And for funders, there's two ways we can get involved in scale. The one is our own, and I think there's potential for a number of funders to pool funding to do large-scale rollouts, provided that it's led by government and that government is, so we use the phrase, putting skin in the game. It can't be totally led and funded by donors, but I think there's potential for funders to fund large-scale rollouts as well.
I think if I needed to add anything, I agree with what's been said, but also this idea of like, with working with funders, the delegation of cooperative sort of agreements, in the sense of knowing that when you're working with a particular funder, there's already an agreement between a government and that particular funder that this is the area we can have the most impact, the depth. This is where we can put our funds. This is where we can advocate on your behalf for private sector, because I think we have not done enough in regards to education with private sector investment. And I think that that's also a way forward, and having those conversations and not being so siloed in those conversations, but being able to create a more open environment where we can be more financially inclusive, as opposed to being exclusionary about, you know, who we partner with, because maybe we have some fears around whether or not this partner will produce or partner with us, or however it goes. But that's something I've been thinking about in regards particularly to basic education and reading and all of this, because everyone in this room is a benefactor. We have children, we all were educated. I mean, the person who works for a car association, rather, who is you know, private sector, they're all benefits. And this is something everyone thinks they can do, but we know it's not. It takes skilled individuals to teach children to read. And we all went through it. But I think really broadening our mind about how to create those fiscally inclusive models, and communicating that again. I think when you talk about the way forward, like I said, I mentioned private sector investment, I mentioned small and medium enterprises, and it's not just about the dollar or the rand, but it's also about relationships. Who are we building the relationships with? And I would think that as the government has already been thinking of, the DBE has already been thinking about how to move this forward, it needs to be elevated beyond, again, beyond our monitoring and evaluation colleagues, but actually, what conversations are we having with the other entities, with, you know, with other elements and sectors within education, to say, are you also advocating for this? You know, are we talking to our curriculum colleagues? Are we talking to those at various levels to actually execute this, and to be honest with you, to let go of territories? I think that that's also a stumbling block, that as we talk about how can we improve reading for our children, which ultimately has an effect in our communities and economically, we have a lot of kingdoms within the context of education, and everyone's guarding their minds. So maybe we can create ways to disrupt, disrupt the territories. I think that's something else that not just DBE, but even within our own institutions, we have to consider. So.
Thank you. So, I mean, from what I'm taking here is that the major issue is around collaboration, that we need to collaborate. So this is collaboration between the donors, collaboration with the NGOs, but collaboration between government itself, that this work cannot be left to just DBE alone as the person who's going to actually realize the goals that we would like to have. And the important words, co-creation, that we are involved all in this as equals and not someone that are subordinate or their ideas are not important, but every idea is important, and we need to be participating in this co-creation. And then the issue of language, ensuring that we don't only speak to ourselves, We are the converted. Let us not only talk to ourselves, but let's talk to people who are outside so that they understand the importance of having correct foundations so that we realize the kind of education that we would like. And then that it's not only large donors, but your private sector that we need to be engaging to ensure that they participate in this co-creation, in being catalyst in building an education that is going to change in this country. So these are the takeaways from the panel, and I would like us just to give them a round of applause for these great insights that they've given. Yes. So just in closing, they've given me also the work of trying to close this important meeting that we've had here. So first of all, that I wish to say thanks to DBE and the donors and everyone who participated in this, the people who have arranged everything so that it becomes a successful engagement. Most of the time, when people talk about research, we always think it's very convoluted, something that sits somewhere that no one actually worries about. But what this has shown is that it's practical. And what the work that has been done here is to simply say, whatever you want to implement, ensure that at least you know that it works before you implement it at large scale. And this is an important takeaway to say, no, we are all involved in this. All of us have gut feelings, but your gut feeling is not necessarily the truth. And this is what this work is trying to show us. So reading goal is an important goal that we have as a country. And we should always remember that this reading goal is not just for people to know how to read, but it also affects the quality of lives of our citizens in the country. And it is the investments, if we are making right investments in the reading of our children, that we will be able to see the kind of education that is improving. It's not just reading for the sake of reading, but actually it's the systems that are being developed in reading that are able to actually help the system of education to improve. And this is an important issue that I've seen in terms of our discussions from yesterday and today. So this challenge is an important one, that most of the time we like to essentialize it, that we are improving reading. But actually, we are improving the education system. And it is when we keep on developing those systems to improve reading that will actually be able to affect the kinds of the system as a whole, as in education that we would like to see. So we are faced as a country with a triple challenge of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. And this should always be something that we are obsessed with. Whatever we do, whether it's be reading or you're analyzing or a policy that you are developing, how is this reducing unemployment? How is this reducing poverty? And how is this reducing inequality? And this is important, that education does not only happen in the classroom. And the research that we've been seeing here from yesterday to today is that learning or reading does not only happen in the classroom, but it's also the contextual factors that we always have to be thinking around. It is how the education level of the parents, it is also how the economy is operating. It is just more than just what happens in the classroom. So the deliberations from this Indaba are setting it clear that for us to succeed, there are few things that need to be in place. One of it is that has been said from yesterday is political leadership. I'm not a politician. I heard someone yesterday kept on emphasizing that he's not a politician. I'm also not a politician. But what I can say is that for any policy to succeed, you do need this political leadership. And as a country, we've been having reading in our site. Through the MTSF and through SONA, that the president has said that he wants to see our children reading for meaning. And this is an important issue because it has elevated reading to more than just our reports that we do. So we keep on always go to cabinet to say, for cabinet, we are worried about the reading levels of the country. So we are busy biting our nails that when the Pell results are coming out, what is it going to be saying to us? Because as the president is always worried on the levels of the reading in the country. Not only is it in the MTSF, but it is also in your NDP as part of sustained agenda of government that we would like to see improvement in reading. But as I say, it is not just reading, but it is the whole system. You can't just make reading work when the rest of the system is actually failing. Number two, they talked about issues of budgets, that if you say you're committed to something, let us see the money. So we, as a country, even though Martin always says it's not growing at the level that it needs to be growing, we also want to say that for the past 3 years, we've also been showing that the biggest expenditure is in the social sector. And education is also consuming a big chunk of it. And this is important because we are saying as we continue to invest in this education, what the pressure is going to be is, what is this money buying us for? And this then brings us back to say the work that we are doing today in terms of reading is that we will need to be able to demonstrate that that investment is an investment that is changing learners' lives and is changing the people in our country and the performance of our schooling system. And the third one is that you need a sustained agenda. So you do need political will, but you also need a sustained agenda of saying we want to see the education system growing. And this is an important, yes, you might have the politicians, but you also need a bureaucracy that keeps on saying whatever we do, how are we increasing reading? How are we increasing and improving the performance of the system? You need also to ensure that the parents are also having this investment in this reading, so that it's not something that is done in DBE, done at school, but the whole of society sees education as an important thing that we need to have. So it's not just only sustained politically, but sustained in our lives, in our everyday things that we do. And there's the issue of clear line. Are we all clear of what needs to be done? As researchers, as the converted, we sort of know what needs to work and what works. But have we been able to communicate this with the people who are outside our education system? Because those are the allies that we need. It's not only the politicians that you need, but you need the parent, you need the unions, you need the NGOs, you need the civil society to be invested in this goal that we are having of ensuring that we will have the kind of education that we would like to have. So going forward then, we need to say the importance of evidence. Evidence is important for every policy that you have. It's not what is popular, it is not what everyone has voted for in terms of raising their hands, but it is it something that is working and that we can demonstrate that it works? Because the rands and the dollars are becoming less and less. And we need to be able to say we can demonstrate that this what we want to suggest or what we wanted to implement it is something that works. Can we use then these resources more efficiently? If we are investing in reading, are we investing it in an efficient way? Is it the best way that we are investing in? It's not enough just to say you are investing in reading and you are committed in reading, but are you doing it in an efficient way? And what are the trade-offs? We need to always think about the trade-offs. In education, you have so many things that you need to do. And how do you sequence and how do you prioritize becomes an important thing. And we need then to ensure as a country that we are a system that knows how to take these trade-offs. Going forward, budgets are becoming smaller and smaller. And now we are getting there that when we meet Spencer, sorry Spencer, since everyone has been sent to you, that when we meet Spencer, Spencer needs to be able to say, this thing that you wanted funded, can you prove that it really works? Can so that when he goes and asks for this money, can he show evidence that this what needs to be funded actually works? And this is going to be even more difficult because budgets are going to be cut because of the economy that we have. And so evidence becomes now a driving force, not what we feel is nice, not what is nice to have, but is there evidence that this thing really works. Then the last one is the issue of accountability. It's easy for us to say teachers need to be accountable, but it's not only teachers. It is your district, it is your circuit, it is the provinces, it is also at national, but also as government. And the more we have systems that are easy for communities and parents to hold us accountable, it is when we will see the results that we would like to see. So if we want reading to continue being seen and being in the conscience of everyone, we need to ensure that we have systems also that everyone in the community can use to hold us accountable. Every parent in the middle of Lusikisiki should be able to say, my children, they are not able to read because I've already tested them without coming up with a very complicated test that they can be able to hold their school accountable. Because it's when all of us are accountable, not only bureaucratically, but also as a society, that we will see the kind of reading that we would like to have. And so I'm really, really glad with the work that we've done today, but I'm saying more work needs to be done going forward in ensuring that reading becomes core in everything that we do, because that's how we are going to be judged 5 years, 10 years from now, to say, when we had the chance, did we make a difference in the children's lives? And reading is going to be the thing that they are going to be judging us. And therefore, let's go forward and really make this reading work in all the spheres, in every part of our lives. Make sure reading is important, that it's not just an economic thing, but regardless of your status, reading becomes an important thing. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Thabo. This brings us to the end of a good 2 days. And all that remains for me to do before you get some lunch is to just thank everyone that's been part of this. I've really enjoyed it, and it's been a privilege, and there's a lot of people to thank, not only for these 2 days, but for all the work that we've been doing over the last nearly 10 years. So going from this panel, let's start with the donors. So thank you so much, especially to UNICEF, Xenex, and USAID, who've been the 3 really big donors. You've committed a lot of funding, and it's not only the funding, as I think has been said now, it's that engagement and that close working together for quite a long time now. So really, really do appreciate that. There are other donors out there who have funded at various stages. There was also 3IE, who were the first people to commit to funding this work. The International Initiative for Impact Evaluation. The Hempel Foundation in Denmark is currently funding work with UNICEF that we're doing in the Northwest. Anglo funded the initial round of work as well. So thank you so much to the donors, but it's also all the partners. It's not only those who've contributed financially. We have a lot of partners. Some of you are with us, some are not with us today. So on the implementation side, there have been various partners who've worked in implementing these programs with us. And we have Maltino, who is represented here today. Class Act, who I don't think are represented here today. Oxford is here today. Foundations for Professional Development, I don't think are here today. But those are some that I can think of now that have worked with us. And then on the evaluation side, because all our projects have had implementation going on in many schools, but then also a lot of detailed evaluation work going on to understand what's happening. And there we've had Decipher Data, who are represented here today, Colisa Management Services, the HSRC, and Social Surveys Africa. let's give them a round. Then, from a government point of view, it's not just been us as the National Department of Basic Education, but we've had wonderful support in the Northwest from the department there. Thank you for being here as well today. And in Mpumalanga, thank you for being here. And then Thabo and the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation have supported financially as well as strategically, and it's been really valuable. So to the government partners, thank you very much to you and any other partners I have not mentioned. Thank you then for everyone all the speakers, everyone who participated in the panels and the presentations. Yes, we can clap for them. Yeah, no, we had a really exciting lineup and really appreciate everyone's insights. And especially I want to thank Dave Evans and Noam Angrist for making the trip all the way to South Africa and for presenting. Thank you so much to you. Then for helping make this event really exciting and well put together and well broadcasted, I want to thank Roth Communications and also the DBE's communications team for supporting us so well. Thank you. Then I want to thank our own team, the members of our research coordination, monitoring and evaluation team for putting this all together. For being here and a lot of work. I'm tempted to mention everyone by name, but maybe just Kolosa for the work she did in taking a lot of the pressure in project managing this event. So thank you so much to everyone in the team for pulling together and being here. And also to our leader, Carol. Thank you so much, Carol. Yeah. I think that is it, and thank you to everyone. Thank you for everyone for being here, for the partnering in different ways as we do this work. So on that note, let us continue to work together as has been mentioned. Let's work together. This is definitely, addressing reading is not something where we must compete and work in different spaces. We have to all work together to try to do what we can. So thank you, and let's carry on doing that. That's it.